There is a silence that lingers in the halls of power, a quietude that hums beneath the grand speeches and the polished smiles of kings. It is the silence of calculation, the unspoken arithmetic of rule, where every gesture is weighed, every word measured, and every smile, though it may seem warm, is a carefully placed stone in the architecture of control. To the peasant, toiling under the sun with calloused hands and a back bent by the seasons, the king's smile is a mystery, a flicker of light from a distant tower, untouchable and inscrutable. Why does he smile while the fields burn and the granaries empty? Why does his laughter echo through feasts while the people whisper of hunger? This is not merely a question of politics or economics, though it wears their masks. It is a question as old as civilization itself, as fundamental as the divide between the earth and the sky. The smile of the king is not an expression of joy but a tool, a weapon, a signal. Sometimes to allies, sometimes to enemies, and often to the masses who must never see the gears turning behind the throne. Machiavelli, that sharp-eyed observer of human nature and power, understood this better than most. In his world, the prince, the ruler, must wear many faces, must be both lion and fox, must know when to bare his teeth and when to soften them into a grin. The smile is not weakness, it is strategy. But to the peasant, whose life is bound to the soil and the seasons, such smiles are either blessings or betrayals. The king's benevolence may be real, or it may be the velvet glove hiding the iron fist. The peasant suffers not because the king is cruel by nature, but because suffering is often the price of stability, the collateral of order. The ruler must sometimes choose between the illusion of kindness and the reality of control. And more often than not, control wins. Machiavelli would nod in recognition. The prince who wishes to keep his crown must sometimes let the people hunger so they do not grow bold, must sometimes let them struggle so they do not rise. Yet there is a deeper layer here, a cosmic irony that stretches beyond the machinations of men. The king smiles not because he is happy, but because he must. His throne is not a seat of comfort but a cage of expectations. The peasant may curse his own chains, but the king's chains are invisible, woven into the very fabric of his rule. To falter in his smile is to invite doubt. To show fear is to invite rebellion. The peasant suffers visibly, his pain etched into his body, his poverty written in the lines of his face. The king's suffering is hidden, folded into the weight of decisions that determine the fate of thousands. And so we arrive at the heart of the paradox. Power does not free a man from suffering. It merely changes its shape. The peasant's pain is raw and immediate, the ache of labor, the sting of want. The king's pain is the slow erosion of self, the knowledge that every choice is a gamble, every alliance a potential betrayal. He smiles because the alternative is chaos. He smiles because the world demands it. But let us not mistake this for justification. Machiavelli does not absolve the ruler of responsibility. He merely illuminates the brutal calculus of rule. The king's smile is not innocent. It is a calculated performance, a piece of theater in the grand drama of power. And the peasant's suffering? It is often the cost of admission, the price paid for the illusion of order. This is the world as it has always been, a world of masks and mirrors, where the powerful craft their own truths and the powerless navigate the shadows they cast. To ask why kings smile while peasants suffer is to ask why the sun shines on both the just and the unjust. The answer lies not in morality but in mechanics, not in fairness but in function. To understand why kings smile while peasants suffer, we must first dismantle the myth that power operates on the same moral axis as the lives of ordinary men. The ruler does not abide by the rules of the ruled. He exists beyond them, not by divine right, but by necessity, a necessity forged in the crucible of human nature itself. Machiavelli's great revelation was not that rulers are cruel, but that cruelty and kindness are merely instruments, levers pulled in service of something far colder, the preservation of power. The smile of the king is not an expression of joy but a signal, a carefully crafted illusion meant to project strength, benevolence, or indifference, whichever best serves the moment. At the core of this dynamic lies a fundamental asymmetry. The peasant's life is governed by immediacy, the need for bread, the fear of drought, the exhaustion of labor. His suffering is personal, visceral, a direct consequence of forces beyond his control. But the king's world is one of abstraction, of calculated moves and deferred consequences. His smile is not for the peasant. It is for the court, for the rivals watching from the shadows, for the historians who will one day write his name. The peasant sees only the surface, the feast, the procession, the golden robes, while the king navigates a labyrinth where every corridor hides a knife. Machiavelli's prince is neither good nor evil in the traditional sense. He is effective, and effectiveness in rulership often demands actions that would horrify the common man. A famine may be allowed to run its course if suppressing it would drain the treasury needed for war. A rebellion may be crushed with disproportionate force not because the king is bloodthirsty, but because mercy today invites greater chaos tomorrow. The smile, then, is a mask of stability, a way to reassure the people that all is well, even when it is not. To admit suffering would be to admit vulnerability, and vulnerability is the first crack in the foundation of power. Yet there is a deeper, almost tragic dimension to this. The king is as much a prisoner of his role as the peasant is of his. The peasant may curse his fate, but the king must never show doubt, for his doubt becomes the people's panic. The peasant may weep openly, but the king's grief must be swallowed, transformed into something useful. A speech, a decree, a strategic marriage. The weight of this performance is its own kind of suffering, a constant self-erasure in service of the crown. The smile is not a lie so much as a translation, the conversion of human frailty into the currency of rule. And what of the peasant? His suffering is not incidental but structural. A society built on hierarchy requires those at the bottom to bear its weight. The king does not smile because he is blind to this suffering, but because acknowledging it would unravel the fiction that justifies his rule. If the people believe their hardships are natural, inevitable, or even deserved, they are less likely to revolt. But if they see that their suffering is the direct result of choices made in marble halls, the entire edifice trembles. Thus, the king's smile is also a distraction, a way to keep eyes turned upward in or rather than inward in question. This is where Machiavelli's realism becomes almost poetic in its ruthlessness. He does not ask whether it is right for kings to smile while peasants suffer. He asks what would happen if they did not. A grin-faced ruler invites speculation. Is he weak? Is he guilty? Is he losing control? The smile is a performance of invincibility, a way to project order even when chaos gnaws at the edges. The peasant's suffering, in this sense, is not just tolerated but sometimes subtly encouraged, because a people who are hungry are easier to control than a people who are fed and restless. A man who must beg for bread is unlikely to demand rights. But let us not reduce this to mere cynicism. There is a terrible logic here, one that transcends individual rulers and speaks to the nature of power itself. The king is not free. He is bound by the same forces that bind the peasant: fear, necessity, the unrelenting pressure of survival. But his chains are made of gold rather than iron. His smile is his shackle. The peasant's suffering is his. Power does not exist in the open. It thrives in the half-light, in the unspoken understandings between those who rule and those who obey. To grasp why kings smile while peasants suffer, we must step beyond the realm of policy and into the realm of myth, where truths are not spoken but enacted, where history repeats not as fact but as parable. Consider the ancient story of the fisher king, ruler of a wasteland, his body wounded in a way that mirrors the decay of his kingdom. He sits enthroned in splendor, yet the land withers, the people starve, and no one can say why. The king does not weep, he presides. His smile is not joy but ritual, the performance of sovereignty even as the roots of the realm rot beneath him. This is the first great illusion of power, that the ruler and the ruled inhabit the same world. They do not. The peasant lives in the world of flesh, of aching muscles and empty stomachs, of children buried in droughts and winters that outlast the firewood. The king lives in the world of symbols, where a raised hand can mean war or pardon, where a feast can signal prosperity even as the granary's empty. His smile is part of this theater, a carefully staged act to convince the audience, the people, the nobles, the spies of rival courts, that the story is still under his control. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. The prince, he wrote, must be a master of appearances, for it is appearances that hold the mob in check. A king who lets his mask slip is a king who invites the dagger. There is an older tale still, whispered in the dialects of forgotten empires. The tale of the scorpion and the frog. The frog carries the scorpion across the river, knowing the scorpion's nature, trusting its promise not to sting. Midway, the sting comes, and as they both sink, the scorpion shrugs. I could not help it. It is my nature. The king is the scorpion. His smile is not a betrayal of his nature, but an expression of it. To expect him to rule otherwise is to expect the river to flow backward. The peasant, like the frog, knows the risk. But what choice does he have? He must believe, if only to make the weight of his yoke bearable. Yet there is another layer here, one that Machiavelli himself might have appreciated. The king is also the frog. He, too, is bound by the nature of power, which demands that he play his role or be swept aside. A ruler who truly grieves for his people's suffering is a ruler who will not last. For grief is a luxury that power cannot afford. The smile is his defense, his way of saying, I am still here, still unbroken, still in command. The tragedy is not that he deceives the people, but that he must deceive himself first. And then there is the most potent symbol of all, the crown itself. It is not merely an object, but a living idea, heavy with the ghosts of every ruler who ever wore it. The peasant looks up and sees gold. The king feels its weight and knows it is lined with thorns. To wear the crown is to accept a pact. You may wield power, but power will also wield you. The smile is part of the price. A grimacing king is a failing king. A weeping king is a dead king. The peasants suffer, yes, but the king suffers too, not in his body, but in his soul, which must harden or shatter. These stories are not mere fables. They are the subconscious grammar of power, the unspoken rules that even the most ruthless rulers obey without realizing it. The king smiles because the story demands it. The peasant suffers because the story requires it. To change the ending, one must first change the narrative. And that is a feat no single ruler, no single people, has ever managed for long. The distance between a king's smile and a peasant's suffering may seem like the stuff of history books, a relic of feudal courts and Renaissance intrigues. But the mechanisms Machiavelli exposed are not confined to palaces. They pulse through boardrooms, governments, and even our daily interactions. Power wears modern suits instead of crowns, yet its essence remains unchanged. It rewards those who master its illusions and crushes those who mistake its performance for reality. To understand this is to arm oneself against the subtle tyrannies that shape our world. Consider the corporate executive who announces layoffs with a serene grin, praising the resilience of the team while severing livelihoods. His smile is not a betrayal of his role, but its purest expression. Like Machiavelli's prince, he knows that admitting doubt would undermine authority, that showing hesitation would invite chaos. The employees, today's peasants, are left to parse the dissonance. How can the hand that fires them also pat their shoulders with paternal warmth? The answer lies in the division of worlds. The executive inhabits a realm where numbers justify sacrifices, where shareholder value absolves human cost. His smile is the modern crown's glint, designed to signal control even as the foundation shakes. This pattern repeats in politics. A leader facing scandal doesn't confess. He smiles, pivots, reframes. The more severe the crisis, the broader the grin, for the alternative is to concede vulnerability. Machiavelli's lesson here is clinical. The moment a ruler's mask slips, vultures circle. Modern media amplifies this dynamic exponentially. A single grimace can spiral into trending hashtags. A sigh can birth conspiracy theories. Thus, leaders are trained to perform like kings of old, their emotions meticulously curated by teams of handlers. The public, meanwhile, navigates a storm of manufactured sincerity, left to wonder why policies that boost the economy leave them choosing between rent and groceries. The suffering is real. The smiles are strategic. But the most insidious application of this principle lives in our personal hierarchies. Every social group has its micro-kings. The charismatic friend who dictates plans without consultation. The family patriarch whose jokes mask control. The influencer who moneizes relatability while living in unattainable luxury. These are not villains. They are simply players of the game. Leveraging Machiavelli's timeless insight that affection and fear are two sides of the same coin. The difference between ancient kingdoms and modern friendships is one of scale, not substance. The smile that disarms a peasant also disarms a co-worker. The unspoken rule that one does not challenge the king becomes don't rock the boat. So how does one resist? The first step is to see the machinery behind the mask. When a leader's grin doesn't reach their eyes, when a corporation's "we're all family" rhetoric accompanies wage cuts, recognize these not as hypocrisies but as proof of power's consistency. The second step is to reject the lie that suffering is inevitable. Kings rely on resignation, the belief that this is just how things are. But history's greatest disruptions came when peasants stopped accepting their role in the story. Unions, protests, and collective bargaining are the modern equivalent of storming the palace gates. They force the smiling king to negotiate with reality. The final step is the most radical: to refuse to wear the crown in your own sphere. Every person holds fragments of power over employees, children, social circles, and faces the same choice as Renaissance princes. Wield it with awareness or perpetuate the cycle. Will you be the parent who demands obedience through fear, or the one who leads with transparency? The manager who hides behind corporate jargon, or the one who acknowledges hard truths? Machiavelli might argue that the former is safer, but safety isn't justice. The king's smile and the peasant's suffering are not opposites. They are collaborators in a dance as old as civilization. One cannot exist without the other, for power requires contrast. Light needs shadow to be seen. But this dance is not immutable. It persists only because we mistake its steps for natural law, because we bow to crowns we've been taught to see as ordained rather than crafted. The transformational question is this: will you live as a subject in someone else's story, or will you rewrite the narrative? To choose the latter is to recognize that every hierarchy is upheld by collective belief. The king's authority vanishes the moment peasants stop kneeling. The CEO's power evaporates when workers walk out. This isn't idealism, it's the coldest realism, proven by every revolution in history. Machiavelli's true gift was not his defense of ruthlessness but his exposure of power's inner workings. He showed us the gears so we might learn to stop them. The call, then, is not to vilify the kings of the world but to outgrow our need for them. To build systems where no one's survival depends on another's performance of benevolence. Where smiles are not tools but truths. The choice is yours. Will you keep watching the stage, or will you tear it down?